Resuming debate, the honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to rise today to speak on this motion from the member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola. That's a rather long constituency name, but nonetheless honored to speak against the motion today, as you've heard from other colleagues of mine on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, internal trade is an important priority for the government. It is a key platform for growth, long sustainable economic growth. As the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development said earlier today, our government is working actively with provincial and territorial counterparts to address the barriers to Canada's internal trade. Our government believes that we need to continue to be focused on collaborating with our partners to achieve an agreement as opposed to antagonizing them. Mr. Speaker, I would like to focus my time bringing to attention the very important issue in internal trade, and that is what our government is doing to lower trade barriers internationally, including the involvement of the provinces and territories. As outlined in the Minister of International Trade's mandate letter, the government is developing a new Canadian trade and investment strategy with the focus on working actively with Canadian companies to help them grow. The strategy will include a strengthened investment in Canada office to support Canadian jurisdictions in attracting foreign direct investment, plans to help Canadian businesses take advantage of international trade agreements, a targeted strategy to promote trade and investment with emerging markets, with particular attention to China and India, and improved support for Canadian companies looking to export and Canadian communities looking to attract investment. Canada has always relied heavily on international trade and investment for its economic well-being. We are a large country with a relatively small population and a high standard of living. We produce more in terms of goods and services than our population consumes. As such, we sell our goods and services internationally. This is one factor that contributes to maintaining a strong economy. Exports of Canadian goods and services in 2014 were just under 1/3 of our GDP, and 1 in 5 Canadian jobs is related to exports. In order to provide international trade opportunities for Canadian businesses, we work to maintain and increase access to international markets. Against a backdrop of slowing global economic growth, it is important for Canada to continue to expand our trade network and to strengthen our competitive position. Companies in Canada have improved access to markets through our network of FTAs, air transport agreements, and foreign investment promotion and protection agreements. With our international trade policy initiatives, Canada seeks to maintain a level playing field with our competitors and to open new markets for Canadian goods and services through a range of trade policy tools, some of which include multilateral negotiations at the WTO, bilateral and regional trade and investment agreements. Canada is competing from a position of strength due to factors such as our strong economic fundamentals, our envious position as one of the most attractive countries for investment and doing business, and the extensive trade agreements Canada has negotiated with key trading partners in recent years. Canada's trade is heavily weighted to traditional partners. We know that our relationship with the U.S. remains essential. However, despite the U.S.'s recent strong economic performance, emerging markets as a whole are growing faster and are expected to see continued growth in the long run. This is why we are working to bring our recently concluded agreements with the Ukraine and with the European Union into force and to ratify updates that we have made to our FTAs with Chile and Israel. Canada is also actively consulting Canadians on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as you will have recently heard, Mr. Speaker. Furthermore, the Government of Canada is looking at opportunities to enhance trade relationships with emerging and established markets, including China and India. While the negotiation of international trade agreements is an exclusive federal responsibility under Canada's Constitution, provinces and territories are important partners in developing and delivering on Canada's international trade negotiations agenda. The Minister of International Trade was mandated specifically to work with the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development to engage with provincial, territorial and municipal governments to ensure our strategies, to the greatest extent possible, which are aligned to strengthen the overall Canadian brand and to reduce complexity and administrative burden for foreign investors and Canadian companies engaged in international trade. In this regard, the federal government closely collaborates and consults with provinces and territories through a variety of effective federal, provincial, territorial consultative mechanisms, some of which include FPT meetings of ministers responsible for international trade, FPT meetings of deputy ministers responsible for international trade, long-standing working level issues-based meetings of the FPT Committee on Trade, also known as C-Trade, ongoing consultations and exchanges of information through a dedicated FPT website, regular meetings and teleconferences with the provincial and territorial heads of delegation consultative group dedicated to softwood lumber issues, ad hoc FPT consultations to address specific issues as required, invitations for provinces and territories to attend real-time briefing sessions with the chief negotiator and lead negotiators during certain negotiating rounds, and finally, FPT international business development networks to discuss issues related to trade promotion, including the promotion of concluded FTAs and how to best position Canadian exporters and investors to take advantage of the benefit of FTAs. Regular dialogue with provinces and territories ensures that the broadest national perspective on priorities and interests is reflected in Canada's international trade agreements and provides Canada's international trade negotiators with timely, well-informed input on areas of key provincial territorial interest and sensitivity in various negotiations. In the case of the negotiation of the Canada-European Union Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, or CETA, more direct and provincial and territorial involvement in the negotiation process was unique and unprecedented due to the specific circumstances of the negotiation. In particular, provinces and territories were expected to make binding commitments in areas that fall under their jurisdiction, such as the sub-federal government procurement, which is unique to CETA. For this reason, provinces and territories were closely involved in the negotiations process. Following the conclusion of trade negotiations, provinces and territories remain key partners in promoting the benefits of concluded agreements and ensuring Canadian companies are aware of new market access opportunities. Provinces and territories also play a significant role in the softwood lumber trade file with the United States, given that forest management practices, timber pricing methodologies, and forestry programs administered at the provincial level are at the heart of the issue. The federal government consults extensively with provinces and territories when developing and implementing strategies related to negotiations, as well as litigation where necessary, as well as in the implementation of any agreements relating to softwood lumber. Consultative mechanisms such as the Softwood Lumber Heads of Delegation Consultative Group are in place to promote collaboration and to ensure regular engagement among federal, provincial, and territorial governments. Provinces and territories are also involved in defending Canada's interests when one of their measures or a joint federal-provincial measure is challenged under NAFTA's Chapter 11. In some circumstances, they contribute financially to the associated legal costs. Mr. Speaker, global trade has evolved. Barriers to internal trade can impact our ability to take advantage of the benefits of international free trade agreements. The more Canada signs international agreements like CETA, the more important it becomes for our internal market to be as open and efficient as possible. Undertaking domestic reforms to our internal market will in turn enhance Canadian competitiveness on the world stage. Mr. Speaker, we agree the current agreement on international trade needs to be renewed. However, we strongly believe that we need to work with our provincial and territorial partners to reach that agreement. Negotiations only work when all partners are at the table and that they respect each other. In moving to this judicial system, it will only hinder our current negotiations and add additional barriers to reaching a renewed agreement, which is the fundamental flaw in the member opposite's motion. We need to continue our current approach and to reach a negotiated agreement with our territorial and provincial partners. And that is why I'm against this motion. I would encourage members on all sides to vote against it as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And while I certainly welcome robust debate in this House, it seems that the Liberal members continue to use the same structure over and over. Every time we talk about the constitutional right of Canadians to trade, they decide to talk about the agreement on internal trade. And the motion is about the constitutional right for a Canadian to trade with a Canadian. Does this member recognize and support that right? Thank you.
The honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for his question. Of course, I, along with all of my colleagues on the government side, support all of the rights and freedoms which are enshrined in the Canadian Charter. As I alluded to it towards the end of my remarks, the flaw that we see in the opposition motion is that it would seek to circumvent the natural course of litigation which is being undertaken. We are working closely with the province of New Brunswick. The province of New Brunswick has considered, and I believe is seeking leave to appeal that decision. But fundamentally, the way forward is to work with provinces and territories to strengthen the internal trade agreements. Thank you.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député de Salaberry-sur-Loire.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je viens d'entendre mon collègue parler du fait qu'il faut consulter les provinces, on a entendu dire le ministre de l'Innovation, du Développement économique et, excusez-moi, là, son titre m'échappe, des sciences, merci à ma collègue, dire que le commerce intérieur était une priorité, qu'il était en consultation, mais comme dans plusieurs dossiers des libéraux, on n'entend pas parler des résultats des consultations. On ne sait pas quelles actions vont être menées, dans quel délai, quel échéancier, quelles sont les stratégies qui vont être adoptées. Alors, si c'est une priorité et si on veut faire en sorte de travailler sur le commerce intérieur, d'éliminer certaines barrières tarifaires et puis aider à la fin les PME à continuer à fructifier puis à se développer, mais quels sont les résultats de ces consultations que les libéraux sont en train de mener?
The honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence.
Mr. Speaker, far be it from me to preempt the outcome of the negotiations. However, I will provide a general update. As you may have heard earlier in the day, negotiations on the internal trade agreement have been progressing well. They have been ongoing since December 2014, and here's what we hope in the final analysis we will achieve from a revised AIT. Expansion of the AIT's coverage, which will apply to economy-wide. It will be subject to target exceptions. There will be fair procurement rules. And so these are just some of the examples which we are endeavoring to make progress on and which will benefit the Canadian economy in the long run.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for Eglinton Lawrence. And I just wonder if you can elaborate a little bit. I know we were talking about constitutional rights here, and as a fellow lawyer like myself, perhaps the member for Eglinton Lawrence would shed some light into the rights of provinces and those rights that are protected under the province as well, and the right for province to raise their own funds and through taxation. I wonder if you can comment on those rights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence.
Well, I thank my colleague for the question. He refers to the fact that I am a lawyer. Hopefully that won't count against me. I'm looking across the aisle there to some of my colleagues who are also called to the bar in the same province as I am. But I will say, of course, we respect the rights enshrined by the Constitution to provinces to collect certain taxation. As I've said before, this is the subject of ongoing litigation. The proper course for this litigation is for it to take its path to the Supreme Court of Canada. If that is what the province of New Brunswick wishes to do, we will continue to support them. But more to the point, we need to work with provinces and the territories to improve internal trade, and that is precisely what we're doing right now. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for, Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I go back to it. The member opposite, is he aware of what he's saying? He's saying that frameworks that may not be constitutional trump individual rights of Canadians. Does he not agree in that article, Section 121 of the Constitution says that products of manufacture and growth shall be admitted free in all provinces? And the fact that we're having this debate and the fact that there is a legal question, does he not agree that the Supreme Court is the one venue where these issues that apply to all Canadian governments, provincial and federal, on issues of constitutional nature should be settled?
Honourable member for Eglinton Lawrence.
Well, I'm going to draw on my my professional experience to answer the question. The short answer is no. The Supreme Court is not the only forum in which that decision will be rendered, that analysis will be rendered. It may very well be the final forum in which that question is answered. But in the meantime, this matter has to follow the normal statutory and common law process. It has to make its way from the Court of Trial to the Provincial Court of Appeal and then ultimately to the Supreme Court of Canada, which is why we are against this motion. This motion would circumvent that process, and that's why we're voting against it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Durham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.